came into ministry young. I was 17, and I'd been in the ministry already for 18 years. And what I was doing for my denomination before I came in was I was a church growth pastor, church growth consultant, and I had helped start a new church built on the Willow Creek model. Okay, so now I come on active duty, find myself on our Den Street, and I'm looking at this chapel, 125 people. So one Sunday I show up, and because if you're on a chapel team of 12, how often do you get to preach? That's right, once every 3 months. So the other weeks, what do? Well, I was trying to help out, so I took the flyers, and I was standing out at the front door, greeting people and handing out bulletins. As I was doing that, I looked across the street because my battalion happened to be immediately across the street from the chapel. So I'm standing there. Some of my soldiers are leaning out the window of their barracks. They start talking to me. So I'm on the chapel steps talking to my soldiers in their barracks. And the barracks were no further than that brick wall outside this window right there. And so I'm talking to them. And then I kind of did it about face, and I look in the building. I thought, why is it that none of the 125 people in this building look like the soldiers living in that building? There's only 50 feet between us, but we weren't getting any of them to walk that 50 feet to the chapel. So that was the first moment for me when I began to realize that, hey, maybe we need to do something a little different, right? Next week, I had a conversation with another chaplain, a more senior chaplain, a brigade chaplain that was more senior in my world at that moment. And he said, well, I heard you did something with the Willow Creek startup before you came. Do you think we could do that in the Army? Those two moments were the moments that started us down a trail where we started thinking about, was there a better way to reach out to soldiers, especially single soldiers living in the barracks? How did we get them out of the barracks and into the chapel? Butts and seats. That's what we were all about. Just trying to get some butts and some seats, right? So, went back inside the chapel. 6 of the chaplains in that group said they were willing to venture out and try something different. That's the top of the 6 original guys up there at the top. And we began to try to figure out how to get these young soldiers into the thing. So the first thing we realized is we didn't know our audience, right? How do you figure out? None of us were Gen Xers. We were all baby boomers. How do we reach Generation X? So we reached out to some folks. We went to Willow Creek, and that was actually, I didn't tell this story in the first part, but that was one of our aha moments. We went to Willow Creek, to the Willow Creek Leadership Conference to learn all about Willow Creek. And halfway through the first day session, we realized that Willow Creek is a baby boomer model. And we were trying to start a Gen X ministry. So we ran downstairs at the break time and asked her, do you have anything on Generation X? And the lady said, yeah, we actually have a whole track this week on Generation X. And we have a Generation X service that just started meeting here in the building. So we said, sign us up. So we signed up for everything Gen X we could figure out. But we narrowly averted starting our train down the wrong track. So then we revamped, came back, thought through how could we do something that would be more applicable to Generation X, right? We started training ourselves, started praying and talking and working together. The next thing we did was we did a survey. Simple things like that, right? So we did a survey. We put out 500 surveys, and the first question on the survey was, do you go to church or chapel? If they said yes, we shook their hands, prayed with them, said, God bless you, keep going. Second question, if they answered no, was why? Why not? Pretty straightforward, right? Why not? And we got a bunch of answers. What do you think the top 3 answers were?
Boring. Too busy.
Boring, irrelevant, nobody there like me. Boring, irrelevant, nobody there like me. Well, that was very disappointing to us, but at the same time, it was encouraging because we looked at it and said, hey, 2 out of the 3 of those things we can take care of. Is the scripture relevant? Absolutely, it's the most relevant book of all time, right? And can we make it not boring? That was our challenge. Can we make it not boring? So what we did is we started working on our philosophy, and the model kind of grew out of this. And Steve's going to talk a little bit more about this. You know, what was our vision? Intentionality. I mean, we had to go beyond the intentionality of who's up next week, and you know, and are we going to play music or not? So we wanted to be intentional about who we were trying to reach, how we were going to reach them, what we could use. We had a team approach. We realized early on, you know, a good service takes 40 to 60 hours to put together. Well, none of us had 40 or 60 hours. So what I had to do was commit 10 hours each. 6 guys committing 10 hours each. That made, you know, one good chapter. The 6 of us were one good chapter is what we, or one good pastor is what we thought. Giftedness. We didn't do it based on rank. We did it based on giftedness. Okay? Was that who was a good speaker? Who was a good leader? Who was better at administration? Who was better at programming? You know, putting together slides and stuff like that. Creativity. We tried to be more creative. And then down here you see where it says media. We tried to bring the media and the arts back into PowerPoint slides. We're cutting edge 23 years ago, believe it or not. So these are PowerPoint slides. We had a live band. We did skits and drama and testimonies. We tried to open up the aperture and use different things. So we designed a different service every Sunday. No 2 Sundays looked alike. Every service that we came, the lineup was different every week, but it always had many of those elements were mixed or remixed, but it looked different every week. Excellence, AAR, we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. So every Monday we got together at the MCO Club, talked about what happened yesterday and what we wanted to do the next week and the week after that. So we planned 3 weeks out, we reviewed 1 week out, and we had time where we built each other up. We critiqued each other's preaching, we critiqued the service, we loved each other, and we got better. That was the goal. We were getting better as a team, as pastors. So, that's kind of how we started out. Meanwhile, on the other coast of the country, there was another team starting out doing the same thing.
Thanks for a nice segue. Again, I was more, when there was half the number of people that are here, I was shocked the first time. So now I'm really shocked there's this many people who have any interest in old guys telling stories. I would draw your attention back to Connor's 8 steps. I think you will see some of that play out. I mean, this thing was supposed to be about leading change, so that's a good rubric to see change through. So for the montage of pictures up there, the black and white ones were all ones that were influences on me. And many of those will be faces you recognize. As I came into the chaplaincy in 1996, I was had a year as a church planter, very unplanned. I was going to be a chaplain, and then had both opportunity, lots of prayer, and it seemed like God was leading. I mean, I think He was leading me that way. And it put me into contact with going to Saddleback, thinking about planting a church. How do you start a church? How do you establish your values and direction? Sent to me as we've thought about reaching we're thinking about the generation that's over the horizon. Going to Mount Hermon, meeting Mark Driscoll, becoming friends with Mark Driscoll and having contact. And that was Christ Fellowship, a church in McKinney, Texas, to which I found at about a year. The pastor and his wife, after a long time of prayer, thought that I should not stay with the team and should go be a chaplain. Which was which I regularly joke, I was the first guy to get fired off the team. But that was very much their heart. And it was very emotional, and we loved each other. But as soon as they said it, I realized it was right. And I spent at least the next several months going, God, Mike, did I not understand? God, was I so confused when I prayed with you? I mean, do I just not get it? What I came to realize over the process of starting was that I did totally understand. I just misinterpreted. He just wanted me to take an exit ramp for a year to learn something before getting back on the highway he had planned. So, the things that were influences. Rick Warren and Saddleback and those philosophies. Dawson Trotman and navigators and his approaches. Bill Bright, a personal passion in my, still, I go back and look at it on the shelf and I'm captivated, a small paperback book called Come Help Change the World. And it just drove my passion. Coming to Christ as a guy with no interest in God at all, but gradually being drawn in through young life. Those shaped my thinking. And that's kind of what that, the montage up there that provided the underpinning of Chapel Next. You got the slide thing? I can slide. Oh, you're awesome. I'll call this the rise and fall of the Army's first emerging church, or chapel. And for those of you who we can split hairs on what's emerging or emergent, I would say our DNA was very different than our beloved East Coast brethren. I was hanging out in Seattle a lot with Driscoll, watching his church, seeing how, I mean, he was at the startup phase. He wasn't big then, and none of the weirdness that happened recently had happened. And really had this vision of reaching the majority of the Army, which was Gen X at that time, with the gospel. That was the vision. Second part of it was focusing on single soldiers. The third part was to change the Army's way of doing chapel to connection and relevance. What I can't overemphasize enough is it was not about Chapel Next or the model, it was about the first two parts. That was where our passion laid. The chapel and the model were merely vehicles to doing that. Next slide, please. So here's the original team. Again, we approached it in ways that were different than peers or churches. Just didn't use terms like senior pastor. I mean, the closest we had to anybody who had any title that sounded normal was Jeff Houston was the OIC. And at the end of the day, Jeff was kind of the final guy. But I was the architect, the visionary, the drama, the preacher. I was probably drama and more in negative ways too. Jeff was this leftover hippie and his wife from the Jesus movement. And he like intuitively understood younger people. And he was the top cover. He was the one who figured out the resources. He was the one who did what I utterly would realize. Now that I've been at Garrison Chapel, I know it's totally inappropriate. He utterly rewired the chapel, every bit of it. Because he figured out the music equipment I wanted, the sound equipment I wanted to buy would like fry all the circuits and we needed rewired, so we just did it. We had an amazing team of navigators that were essential. One named Wes Drake, who was functionally the chief of staff. Most importantly, he was the interpreter. He was the interpreter of Steve and the interpreter of Al and what they meant in helping the rest of the team. And you see the other navigator, Al, he was the counter visionary, the counter architect, the foil to me, the one who would challenge my thinking, who would debate what I thought, we would refine each other, we would disagree in meetings. And just been one of the most extraordinary men I've ever met. I could go on, but what I would emphasize is a few things. No other chaplains, me and Jeff, and several chaplain candidates, several high school, college-age students, a lot of parachurch. Eventually, a couple of other chaplains joined us, and again, the only chaplains who were with us, other than Jeff, were all first term, like first term, first year. And you can kind of see the roles that they took. And I can answer questions about that when we do Q&A. Next slide, please. Here's the timeline. I kind of called it the rise and fall. Somewhat like a business, like any startup, we have a phase over here on the right where it's just conceptual. Thinking about what we're going to do. The funny thing to me is the 16th of September was when I proposed the idea of doing this Generation X chapel. The only reason I remember that day specifically was it was the day I reported for active duty. So I reported to the Corps chaplain. After I listened to what he said,
Yes, indeed.
I proposed an idea for doing chapel totally differently. It's ironic, I now sit in that same seat. Actually, I think it's the same seat. I mean, I like guys buy. I finally asked them to buy me a new chair. I think it's been around that long. And as you can see, that was promptly rejected. I got told to do something else. But one picture you may see in the montage, this old Vietnam veteran was the chief of chaplains named Don Shea. Don had gone out to All-American service, had received a presentation by Dave. It was enough to make him interested in that the big, whatever they called the big beach gathering of colonels back then. He said to the other colonels, "Hey, do any of the rest of you have that?" At which point the first Corps chaplain said, "We do." And as soon as he got back, he told me to get after it. Which I did. I got fired as the youth pastor, but that's a whole other story. But the key points in there, within the first few months, due to personal reasons in my life, those are other stories. Jeff walked the stories with me. I quit. Went back to the same Corps chaplain and told him I couldn't do it. It was a tough day. And a month or two goes by, the Corps chaplain still, because he's now told the chief of chaplains he's got one of these. New major comes on, freshly pinned, named Jeff Houston. Houston gets tagged to do it. Houston hears about me, finds me, meets me for lunch, dusts me off, and says, "Hey, I need your ideas. I'd like you." So, though it was originally my idea, I quit and then I got recruited back onto the team. And that was enough to get me back in the game. Then, like a startup, we went through a phase of experimentation and ideas and trying things, and then begin to gain traction, which we see 20 March 99, our 1-year anniversary, we did a generational ministry conference at Fort Lewis. Dave actually even came over. There may have been others, but as far as I know, that there's been a gap from then to this conference to doing a generational ministry conference. We, within the next year, or next few years, moved into an amazing new facility, added a bunch of new talented first-term chaplains. And then I would say in that move, the Army's first emerging chapel is beginning to die. But it shows none of the signs of death. It shows all the signs of life. It is rapidly expanding in attendance. Everything is positive. The navigators can see it. I couldn't see it. And it was that we had lost that first core, that first value, going for the single unchurched soldiers. And Chapel next, over a period of time, became Chapel family. And we lost the emergent church. We had, amongst those newcomers, Bill Harrison, experienced chaplain, joined us also, and I eventually transitioned to Bill. And then as Jeff liked to get a big laugh at me at the 1 decade mark of Chapel Next, I wrote a fairly harsh critique while a CBSC student. So I will pause there. In this period, Jeff, who was a good friend, we had many conversations about Chapel Next, about contemporary ministry, and then Jeff picks up the story because I would argue he is the one that became a bridge between the two and took our ice breaking and turned it into an Army thing.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it, Dave. And most of all, thanks to all of you. I think all of us really are pretty humbled in ways that anybody would want to hear from some guys a whole lot closer to the end than the beginning of our military time. Anything that might be of value to you. So that's our heart. Is I'll go for a little bit here, and then just pause and we get down to what maybe matters most, which is your questions any way we can encourage or inform. I'm going to start a little bit different spot than I did last time, and just I didn't give you background last time, but for me, my heart got changed September 7th, 1986, as a Green Beret, 10th Special Forces group, on an 18, thought I was going to get off, do in black box, clandestine, commo, make $1 million bucks. By the time I was 30, it was my definitive goal, and God stepped in and just said, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" I said, "Jeff, you you say I'm the most important thing in your life, but like, what are you chasing? It was the age of yuppie, the mid-'80s, and that's just where I was headed. And it wasn't a harsh voice from the Lord, very simple voice. It just said, either say yes or say no, but let's not kid ourselves in regard to who I am in your life. And on a Sunday in Indiana, where I just interviewed for a position the second time around, Lori was with me. She just picked out a house the day before. We were going to be upwardly mobile. The next day, God ambushed us, and we suddenly said yes to God. It was a beautiful thing, and immediately went downwardly mobile. The next 8 years of our life, and I mean downwardly mobile. But it was an awesome time. One of the highlights that awesome time was got off the A-team. Within 4 months, was hired as minister of evangelism and outreach in a local Nazarene church right here in Kansas City, where I had begun seminary because a dear pastor mentor had intervened with the seminary and said, look, yeah, not exactly your normal Bible college background coming in for this guy. He doesn't have this, he doesn't have this, he doesn't have that. But would you let him in on probation? Because God's done something in his life. So that's how I started there. Loved my work in the church, counterbalance all the academic stuff that I really, was just so far from what I had been doing. Sit in church history class, literally have memories from about 35 minutes from here, sitting in church history class, thinking about how you can take down the classroom in the building, coming through the window. No. Back to 2nd century early church stuff. It was quite a leap for me. Enjoyed that time in the local church. We saw neat things happening. The Holy Spirit was working, marvelous senior pastor that was there, and a very traditional work, but one that was given over to try and reach folks. Did about 3.5, 4 years of that, and this is what I was seeing there as a young minister. We were reaching people to the church, and things were going well, but then I could see we were losing people from the church out the back door. So as outreach and evangelism, I had a key part and was excited to get them in the church, but I could also see we were losing them from the church out the back door, if you know what I mean. They weren't sticking, they weren't staying, and that disturbed me so much so I was in kind of a crisis of the soul last year of seminary, and I went to this conference, went with anybody, nobody knew it, it was free, so I could afford it. If you were a seminarian, God bless whoever, deep pockets. And I flew out to California, and I heard a guy speak who did happen to be Bill Hybels, and it was the Willow Creek model. And he talked about a passion for the lost. Now I know of late, it's an ugly story. For him, there have been some real challenges of late. All I can say is for me, Holy Spirit used that powerfully, reoriented me, changed things, and it's like, oh, that makes sense. That's why we're reaching them to the Lord, but we're losing them to the church. And so many things made sense. So fast forward then, back in the chaplaincy, after actually a couple years at this place called Willow Creek, where I had interned, and then it was time to get back in the chaplaincy. And we'd come back to there and we get in the chaplaincy. Did that, and then second assignment for me was to come to a place called Bragg, intersected with what David handed off to somebody called Dave Mickelson, another chaplain many of you may know. And I was part of the team, just became part of the team. Dave PCS tossed the ball to me, and here's simply what happened in regard to knowing Steve from a previous assignment. My second assignment was out there with Steve. Third assignment, coming to 82nd. I could see what, a little bit of what was in Steve's heart and what he had done then as I had come to Bragg, and the Chapel Next model was part of the All-American service and what God was doing there in reaching young soldiers and young families. That excited me in terms of my heartbeat, evangelism and outreach. And then we began to talk about what would it be like if, just like you go to the gospel service somewhere in the inventory, you tended to know what that meant. If you PCS from one place to another, and somebody said, oh, there's a gospel service here, generally speaking, that meant what? You're going to have that cultural experience or model of church. What would it be like if we started to do that with Chapel Next? And maybe we, an all-American service out there, go ahead and say, hey, let's be Chapel Next, East Coast, your Chapel Next, West Coast, and we could begin to, if you will, franchise, brand this, so to speak, so that as you PCS'd and folks went, they could find a service model that resonated, with them. So that was what was behind it becoming Chapel Next, and then really not by any formal organization, but more by personal inspiration. It just multiplied in various spots to this day across the landscape. And there's pluses to that, there's minuses to that. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit later. so what out of that? What's the so what out of that? It might be beneficial just to offer, at least, as I look at it. Let me switch gears, tell you another story. Downtown bowels of Baghdad, fall of '06, fighting some wars. Cop Apache, which had big iron gates that almost look like biblical proportion. You have to shove them open, and they come back. A convoy of about 7 vehicles comes out, and down about 150 meters, hangs to the left, begins to go into the Ville, for one of the 3 combat, rotations each day, 2 daytime, 1 nighttime. We just do those sort of things. Ross is in the turret of that particular Humvee. So he hangs a left, starts going down about another 150, 250 meters. You can cut the tension in that area of town, of course, with a knife. And he hears what nobody wants to hear when you're the gunner in a turret Humvee. That tink, against the Pope shield of something, and something strikes him in the back, falls between his legs, down in the Humvee, and he looks down to see the grenade wedge itself between the radio mount and kind of that middle hump that's in there. Very quickly, he looks to the front right. Staff Sergeant Nelson eyeballs him. Their eyes meet. Ross looks back down at the grenade, and then he does exactly what he's not supposed to do, because we know what you're supposed to do, right? You yell, and that Sergeant Rankin's right. Grenade, grenade, grenade. We've all been trained tactically to do that, and then get out of the vehicle any way you can. And instead of doing that, Ross does what he's not supposed to do. He looks back at Staff Sergeant Nelson, and then he simply says, "I got it," and falls on the grenade, absorbs the impact, earns the Medal of Honor for saving the lives of 4 other guys in a Humvee. Chapel Next from its beginning, All-American service, Chapel Next, coming together, has always been more about the heart than the head. There are some unique things about it, and methodologies and things like that maybe we're done, and that's great. But what I want to most communicate more than anything, it was groups of people that the Holy Spirit were moving that very clearly understood that Jesus had done something for us when it came to, so to speak, falling on the grenade and saying in a spiritual sense, "I got this," and taking a bullet for you and for me. And Jesus dying so that others could live. It was that passion in the heart that moved young chaplains to kind of stand against some significant opposition and things like that there, to say, I cannot not do this. I've got to start something different, because soldiers and their young families out there are staying away from chapel by the hundreds, if not thousands, every single Sunday. And we got to do something about that. So what were some of the distinctives? Was kind of in closing here and reflecting on that. I would say number one was, it wasn't about the gimmicks and caving to just what others wanted. It was about we love you so much. We want to know what Jesus has done for you, that we're willing to change our methods. We're not going to change the message that Jesus died for you and he can change your life. We were on fire for that. But the methods, not the message, but the methods, we'd absolutely be open to change it up. If I needed not be in a tie, but instead need to be in flip-flops and a shorts, no sweat. I'll change my gear so that you feel comfortable. Because we knew they didn't want to say anything, sign anything, give anything, and come in and show up. They just wanted to check it out. So that was one big thing. Another thing would be absolutely distinctive was gift-based, passion-driven rank and material. So rank went in the mix. In fact, we had others who came into All-American service, Chapel Next eventually, because of their rank. They're like, oh, I'm here at PCSN, and I'm the Brigade Humpty Hump, and so I'm in charge, right? And the answer was, no, that's not the way we've chosen in biblical community to do this service, and it's not by rank, it's by giftedness. So if you'd like to join the team, here's what we're about, here's what we're asking you to commit to, and if you'll serve for about 60 days, then the team will affirm where we see your giftedness is, where you're a 10 in the kingdom, and then we'll recommend to you where you best fit in the ministry. That was pretty wild and crazy back then when you went to chapel by where your brigade was, who the brigade chaplain was, and by where your unit designator was. You can believe it, many of you, who are younger may not recall, some of us who are older do. On Sundays, a battalion commander by SOP would task out down to the companies, down to the platoons even, to march the guidons down to the chapel. And we still have, and places are pretty traditional, where the guidons used to be placed representing the command support of that chapel, because that's the way we did it, by geography, by that unit, by that senior chaplain. That's the way we did it. This was wildly different in terms of, it wouldn't be by rank, it would be rank and material. It would be by giftedness, and it would be, again, based on your passion. That was a huge difference there. Another one, again, done in community. Done in community. No hit and run ministry. Oh, I'll come and I'll preach, and then I'll go off post and be a part of the other church. And I'll see you in 2.5 months, come back, preach, and meet me again. Everybody was working together incredibly diligently, spending great time in community, both before the service, to do the service, even after the service, and building lunches that would go from dozens of folks to many people to over 100 people, descending on residential homes, all to have the sense of community for young soldiers and others going on. That was a big deal, doing it in community, even to the point of after actioning that, every Monday, 1500, we'd all circle up and everybody would autopsy what went on the Sunday before in detail for about 90 minutes. And then we launch into a planning cycle for a half hour to an hour for the next 3 weeks, looking at those 3, 2, 1, what was coming at us. Great intensity, giving our best of head, but mostly it was best in heart. And then I'd just say the last item that comes to my mind in terms of some measure of distinctiveness was, wildly creative. Again, going back to, we didn't tinker with the message, but we did tinker a lot with the methods in terms of what would resonate with soldiers. If it was we didn't want anything to keep soldiers and their young families from chapel except the claims of the gospel. So if that got in their way, then we can do about that. But if it was in regard to the way we talked, the way we dressed, the music we played, the way we interacted with them, we were open to changing all that, just so we could build a bridge and not a barrier between them in the love of Jesus Christ, to say to each and every young soldier, young family, hey, comes a sin in your life, I got this, I got this. That was the motivation for my life. So a few reflections, and I think Q&A, Josh?
Yeah, let's do it. The gentleman with you. Well, we got a good 45 minutes to do questions. And I know that they cut a lot of the story short, even from the first time, just to try to get to more questions, and especially some of yours will flush out. As a moderator, let me ask the first one. As I said previously, we tried to start a chapel here. It's kind of a newer model chapel last year, and experienced pretty intense opposition. It largely got worked through, but it was super painful, and still not only worked through. Would love to hear about some of the opposition you experienced, and what were the things that enabled you to penetrate through.
Well, I didn't go first, so I guess I'll go first this time. Opposition mainly was in the form of, we don't need that, that's strange. Asked many chaplains to consider being a part of it. They just weren't interested in it because it was so outside their paradigm of church and chapel. That wasn't quite as bothersome. Some were mocking, and I think later on one of your questions I'll talk a little bit about thickening your skin. I think my skin was a lot thinner then, and would take the mocking personally, but again, there was no interest in it was a decisive no from senior leadership until the chief of chaplains punched a button, like we need to do this across the army.
Some of the most dangerous words, we have done it that way before. That was used very frequently there. On the positive side, I would say we did have top cover when the philosophy of the ministry being, again, gift-based, passion-driven, rank and material was challenged by new chaplains who came in, who, no fault of their own, had grown up under a very different system and said, well, I'm the of course I'm in charge. '05, division chaplain. Well, of course I get to make the call on what goes on, and everything. And who could be better to run anything than me? I'm the most senior in rank, right? And against that, what I would reflect now, all of us who, are senior rank, have to protect against that edge of arrogance. I call it out for what it was, arrogance, thinking just rank gives you more giftedness, not necessarily rank gives you more rank. So it's up to others to decide whether with that rank there is more character, more competency, more connection, the growth of leadership. So in that moment, someone intervened and said, hey, we'll give you top cover, and we'll let these young captains do what they need to do.
You keep saying rank is immaterial, but it's not. I know things work a little bit different on active duty when they do in the National Guard, things like that. But you still have to have permission from the senior guy
Absolutely.
or gal to do it. You can't just say,
Yeah.
well, this is the way we're doing it. And if the lieutenant colonel chaplain comes in and says, no, I want to do it differently, as a major or a captain, you can't say, well,
Yeah, thanks, and that's exactly, to your point, that happened. So others came in up more rank and just said, hey, this isn't right, we can't do it this way, I should be in charge. To which rank, in the best sense, was used at a higher level to
Yeah.
protect and be top covered and say, no. Let these young chaplains do what they're doing. Dave used the quote last session, nothing helps you more than success. So there was a tremendous response happening to the creative things the young are doing, and that allowed other senior chaplains to really mitigate the efforts of some others. And that was a very positive example, I would say there. Josh, your question to proceed, though, in the face of that, I would say it all comes back again to the heart. The conviction that I cannot not do this, that God has put this on my heart, our heart as a team. And we're not out to be obstinate, we're not out to be confrontational, we're going to watch our own humility, we're going to watch our own, how we're living our life as others watch, even maybe looking to shoot us and take us out, so to speak, in terms of what we're doing. But a sense that God's got this on our heart, He's called us to this, we want to be careful, we want to be good, but we are going to proceed as long as we do have the blessing of somebody, that can help us along the way. So fortitude, courage.
I think, I won't go down the road too far, but one of the interesting things is Steve and I think Jeff too, could share with you times where senior people did come in, try to basically run a coup, and then change the basic model, and within 6 months the service was half the size. And I think I can think of at least 3 times that happened, and you could almost, it was a routine occurrence in the sense over 20 years. Thank God over 20 years it's only happened a few times. But we've had that happen, and then sure enough that person would leave, or somebody would move that person out of the way, go back to the model, and the church chapter would go. So there is data, success helps. Data like that helps. It's like, hey, you've got a proven thing here. Why do you want to market it? So that's kind of an aside. I would say that change is always hard. Nobody likes to change. So you just got to be. I think people will help you make change. So you just got to engage those people over and over and over again. And you've got to. Your team has to huddle together and keep communicating the vision, keep asking the question. You gotta know the system, you gotta work the system if you want to change the system. So that was always, like on my team, for Steve, it was Jeff Houston. On my team, it was a guy named Jerry Graham. He was a lieutenant colonel. That was the interesting thing about our first group. I was the juniorest person on the team. But I had just come from doing this in the civilian world. So I had all of the firsthand training and knowledge, and so I was the senior pastor.
And just how radical that was as a departure at the time to say, hey, maybe a model of Corinthians where you let leaders be the leader regardless of rank, where you let the best preacher be the one who's preaching most of the time, as opposed to the guy who's most senior and says, I'm going to preach 3 out of 4, or whatever.
So, sir,
So we're at Chapel next, Fort Campbell, and however that looks, I'm interested to hear, sir, how it's changed. But you've just hit our greatest fear right now, because our top cover is Jim Murphy. But what happens when he rotates out, and you have a service that, and I think we confuse measures of performance versus effectiveness sometimes. But 350 to 400 on a Sunday, but they come in and they say, I mean, how do you stop someone from saying, if they're the senior chaplain, I'm going to be in charge, I'm preaching 3 out of the 4 Sundays. And then I say that looking at the 3 innovators who in a way can, because of rank, become the greatest obstacles, not you personally, but that rank. Because when I talk to the captains, I say, how come, because we have some that aren't passionate about chapel at all. And I just go, why? And they're like, well, because nobody ever gets a chance. No one develops us, no one lets us preach or lead. They just say, you're going to be the admin guy. So how come we're still learning the same lessons?
I think that was one of the things we said in the last meeting. I think was repeating is the challenge is different for the captains in the room than it is for the lieutenant colonels in the colonels. Those of us who are colonels in the room, our job is to some degree, get out of the way. Help or get out of the way. How can we help you? We can help you by empowering you, by sharing with you, what experience we've had. But this takes both. You've got to have the people who are willing to give the permission, who are willing to resource it, who are willing to. So this is not just a mindset change for captains. This is a mindset change for colonels. We need both. We need those innovative. God has blessed me. I turned 58 last month. Right? I am now 40 years older than the average private, who's in my infantry division in Hawaii. 40 years. I need some 20-somethings, 30-somethings to get out there and reach that 18, 19, 25-year-old that, I got a boatload. I can throw a football from my office, and I'm still in the same situation. I can throw a football from my office and hit the barracks. The D-quad, they're right there. I can hit them. But
You'll need rotator cuff surgery. I know the distance.
It's a long throw, but yeah, I can still.
I just jump in too and say, it's a great clarifier for me, helpful sometimes with, just get real clear right off the bat too on, is this kingdom business or core business? Because they're not the same. Don't confuse the kingdom of God with the United States Army Chaplain Corps. Great sanity check for all of, they are not the same. So if the United States Army Chaplain Corps, good as it is, love it, have given the best years of my life to serving the country piece. But ahead of that is the God piece and God country. The God side, that's the kingdom. And I try hard not to confuse that with the core. Sometimes the core will not be of tremendous help in moving kingdom things forward. What do? You just keep trying to move the kingdom things forward. And my experience has been that God has a way of working things out. Not perfectly, not flawlessly, but the same issue that you face at Fort Campbell in terms of the transition of authority and power over the installation. That's been going on for 20
absolutely.
years.
I just wish we would learn it, and and I think you're right, sir. It just seems like the core should maybe help a little bit more than it does. And I feel the same way about the
Sure,
core,
and I bet you do. And again, I just
tough.
want to encourage you, the best stuff, and I'm getting out on the edge here, the best stuff in terms of innovation, creativity, cutting edge, has come not top down. It always comes from you all. Well, exactly what we're doing here, Josh, pulling this thing together, man. It's bottom up. And at least in terms of chaplain stuff, it's kingdom stuff. So just keep at it. The Lord will do what the Lord needs to do.
Just on your note, let's hear from Sherry.
So, talking to 3 basically church planners and reformers, is Chapel Next worth reforming, or do we need to start learning to fail at planning new churches? Because civilian world right now, I was a church planner like yourself, Chapel, and came right in, and it was 50% pass fail rate. Can the chaplain corps, or for that matter any post, be able to take that just go out there and try and fail. Even if we burn out and we go, but we're doing it for the right reasons. And I guess that's kind of where the kickback goes. I'm just curious on your thoughts. Because you started it, do you think it's in need of reform, or do you think we need to try to make things?
I got to chime in on this one. This was one of the first questions that was asked me in that briefing that he talked about, General Captain Shea. We wanted to change the Army and how the Army did chapel, but that didn't mean we wanted to do away with all the other chapels. Those 125 people that were coming to Division South Chapel were happy. They were having their needs met. So I didn't want to do away with Division South Chapel. It's like Baskin Robbins. I just wanted to add another flavor, a flavor that I hoped would bring in single soldiers, right? So I wasn't trying to do away with good works that were already doing. I think Chapel Next is a great work, and that it has legs to go another 10 or 15 years. But it's not our cutting edge program. If we're still thinking of Chapel Next as I used to travel around as the NCTP chaplain, and all the Chapel Next guys, I'd meet with them, and then they'd say, well, what do you think, Chaplain Shaw? And my final question with them was, what's the next Chapel Next? What's the next Chapel Next? Chapel Next was cutting edge 20 years ago. What are you doing now that's going to be cutting edge for the next 20 years? So I don't think it's so much as reforming Chapel Next or doing away with Chapel Next or even cutting Chapel Next, down to a stump and new shoots. Chapel Next has legs, and it should just continue being what it is. What we need is something to come alongside of it that's now going to reach that next generation and become the next Chapel Next, whatever the next Chapel Next is.
I'll try to go quick on it, because I will address a few comments on it in my remarks tomorrow. Probably just a few months ago, I think I was ready to say it's time to celebrate the season of Chapel Next in Marion. And probably where I was. Well, not probably, that's where I was. Interestingly, a few captains, and probably a consistent theme for me is bringing captains in around me. And they challenge the idea, and they're like, do you really mean that, or should we just should we at least revive it here, like get the patient maybe out of hospice but back into some assisted living? So I think I'm ready to put Chapel Next in assisted living and try to bring some life back into it, because similar thing to what Dave said. I think it does have a role within our menu of offerings, and it is still the most likely place that is a chapel that a young family would go to. Now, frankly, I'm old in the game to have teenagers and younger, which is what I have. I wouldn't necessarily want to go to Chapel Next because it's a lot to be desired. But I think we can, again, looking at the post I'm at now, we can bring some life back into it and give it some relevance. I have no passion about that. It's more like this needs to be done. My passion is the same passion I've always had. It's for the same two things that were on the slide. The whole reason I wrote the critique in 2008 of that which we started in 1998 or 1996 was that I thought we had lost our first love. We'd lost our passion of reaching single soldiers with the gospel. And in 2008, the question I asked then, I asked it again 5 years later in a work college paper, is if a group of first term and second term captains emerged with these ideas and took in and by the way, I see Keith Good in the back. These were going on at Fort Hood with the Unchapel. They were going on at Rucker with Wings and other places. There was an emergence of new ideas. I can't think of any time when it wasn't being led by new captains. But where have they been since? And so here's what bugs me. And these things, like, Is it that no captains have had new ideas since the 3 codgers who were sitting up here? That's not really likely. So that begs me with a leadership question. What have we as an institution done that has not enabled or empowered or brought those captains forward with their new ideas? Because there must be captains out there with new ideas. Why is it that none have emerged in a significant way in 20 years? I know we can say the Lord, we can say a lot of things, but my suspicion is the institution that we're now on the top end has unintentionally suppressed that. So I'm not going off your question. Yeah, I think Revive Chapel next, but I'm interested in what is next after next.
Let me just, let me just tell you just one thing. I agree that we don't have the creativity, or we have not, as senior leaders, we have squelched the creativity based on the war and based on priorities. I think over time our own policies have dictated squelching of creativity, doing it the way we've always done it before, sustaining what we have, don't get too far out in front. So I'll take it on me as one of the senior leaders that I know at some point my first worry as a garrison chaplain was, how can I just make sure what we're doing well continues? I say reinforce success, but that doesn't mean enable ingenuity. It's 2 different things. So I think that's an honest assessment.
Good, Steve.
I'll obliquely respond to that open-ended question you have, and then offer up the question. I missed like 5 questions, so I'm picking my best questions. I think that to a large degree, visions that outlast the visionary die a slow death. And while we have passed on SOPs and procedures for working at and running chapels, and to include Chapel Next, we've not necessarily passed on that vision. You know, I'm working at my 3rd Chapel Next, and I can say that I'm guilty of that. Also guilty of not, taking the time to dream and to really figure out what it is we're trying to do, because we're doing it in survival mode from time to time and just operating. Now, having said that, I love that I'm sitting next to my brother Carson Jump, who I've not seen in years, because Carson and I were on, my first chapel job was at Chapel Next Minden Oaks, and as I was thinking about it, I'm thinking, we were working with Jim Murphy, who was saying, hey, if chapel sucks, it's your problem, fix it, make it better, make it good enough for you and your family. Brad Bauman was there, and he and Missy would roll up their sleeves every weekend and serve in the kids' church, never asking a question, never complaining, just serving. Keith Kroon, Jack Stubby, Kurt Spahn, the list goes on of quality men and women who serve the Lord with their whole heart, kingdom business, and modeled that for us, and we got to follow after that. What I find frustrating is that a lot of young guys and gals that I talk to in our core think that if they're not preaching, it's not ministry. And, I don't care if I'm cleaning toilets. If I'm doing it for the Lord, it's as unto the Lord. And I'm having trouble getting traction with that work ethic and idea that was so well modeled for us. So I just wonder if you could speak to the type of person that worked well on your teams and the type of person that didn't.
So I'll maybe speak to that, because I do think we God helped us maybe to do some things right during those days. And one of them was we were very clear. So, leadership matters. I appreciate Steve bringing Cotter's, 8 steps, widely known. Leadership determines the health, the scope, the size, the impact. That's on the shoulders typically of a God-called leader. Who typically, again, the way the Lord seems to do it throughout Scripture, is whispers, in somebody's ear, inspirational dissatisfaction. I don't like what I see, and I've got to do something about it. In fact, I cannot not do something about it. And one of the things we could not do something about was to stop doing it the way we had seen and to start doing something different. And one of those key distinctives was you couldn't do, I think I may have mentioned it, hit and run ministry, that wasn't going to produce good results. That's what we saw. It was very little attention given to weekend service. The doors were open, we knocked it out, checked the box. That was success in the chapel model. And that didn't seem to be reaching many young soldiers and young families. So we got to be smarter, we got to be better. If this is kingdom business, it's about real people, a real hell, and, real life. What can we do better? It was done in community, and that we agreed together, kind of on a code, so to speak, and what were going to be the rules by which we all agreed upon to be part of this spiritual community. And nobody could either rank their way into that or just assume their way into it. Again, be a kingdom model. You had to come with a humble heart, and arrogance in and of itself was enough to say, God bless you, but maybe this isn't for you. And that would be measured very quickly and very easily. If somebody came in and demanded a place on the team or demanded some sort of right to do something, that was a red flag warning right off the bat that maybe this kingdom work, the way we're doing it here, is not for you. And I'd be absolutely in sync with you. Those values have not transferred perfectly from the initial chapel next, that differed slightly even amongst themselves. In other words, by the leader's personality, passion, and calling. So there is a dissipation of that. Vision leaks over time, passion dissipates over time. And what's the only thing that saves that? I don't know, God's Holy Spirit work in each of us for the future, to revive it and clarify it and, move on out. But we weren't afraid to say no.
That's one of your first leadership challenges, actually. If you're the lead pastor of one of these teams, especially on the original teams, the first people you had to convince was the rest of the team. Because what you were convincing them to do was not the typical thing. So you saw my list of guys. My list of guys are all rock stars. Every last one of them, I think, retired as a colonel. So Dave Mickelson was the executive pastor because he had the administrative mind that none of the rest of us had. And so it was like, so Dave has to be convinced that he's not preaching. He's not preaching twice a month. He's administrative. He's running this ship. He is writing anything that's written from the early days of the All-American Service, Dave Mickelson wrote, because that was his role, and he was great at it. But that's your first leadership challenge is getting Mark Jones to be your worship pastor. Okay, Mark, you're not going to preach 2 times a week. You're going to be the worship pastor. James Schaefer, he did our program. So, how do you use video? Nobody was using video back then. How do you interlace a video into a sermon? I know that some of these were effective because I remember them 25 years later. Those guys all were, those were your first people that you had to sell on the ideas because it was totally different.
And one of the very few things, somebody said, one of the very few things leaders do, they really don't do all that many things, but one of the things they must do is protect the values of the institution. And so whatever your vision is and your values are associated with your work, it will be the shepherd's job to protect those values. And that usually comes down to a moment of integrity and the courage to exercise it, to say this would not be in step with our values. We did not serve God well today because of the absence of the energy and focus we put into this week. We're going to do better for next week because soldiers and young families are dependent on it. We can't do everything, but we got to do some things. We can do it better.
Let's take another question back here.
Gentlemen, good afternoon. So one of the things, being a young PFC in 1996, remembering marching to chapel with the guide on in the front, with the transition, one of the things that I've come to appreciate is there's the constant competition for resources. And so as each of you shared, the original intent of the Chapel Next program was to reach the single soldiers living in the barracks. And it sounds like each of you experienced a transition to young families. And now 20 years later, the program's retirees. How does it, in a resource-constrained environment that we function in, where we're trying to get the most bang for our buck, we, in a sense, prevent or allow, if you will, make room for those specific, specialized programs that focuses on the single soldier over here, but then transitions and feeds them into another program that is geared towards families, so that we have that diversity, if you will, so that it doesn't just become one all-encompassing service, but finds that niche. Does that make sense the way I'm explaining it? Because, unfortunately, like at Schofield, we have chapels that go unused for large portions because everybody's competing for that one specific time slot on Sundays. And so how do you see other programs feeding into this, or this feeding into other programs?
So I would say just a quick thought was, we couldn't have done it without the parachurch organizations. I think that's part of the, a missed part of the story I was telling both last session, this one was, hey, we absolutely partnered aggressively with navigators, with Campus Crusade, with Officer Christian Fellowship, because it didn't matter, with spouses, with whomever, 56 mics that were talented, at front and center according to their giftedness, man. It didn't matter because it wasn't core business in the way the Army did it. It was kingdom business and whatever made sense in terms of who we've got. And I would challenge Jason, I would just challenge the assumption too, maybe the new work is absolutely what we need. It's not bifurcated ministries. Maybe we need to see a highly integrated, cradle to grave, thriving, healthy church that represents all age. Now, wouldn't that be groundbreaking? Because everybody wants a church just like their minute flavor, of ice cream. I want it like I want it. Maybe what would be radical would be something totally different. I don't know. I could figure it out, as you mentioned Josh earlier, 20, 25 years back, 30 years back, I could figure it out intuitively what a 20-something was looking for, because I wasn't that far off the mark, and my just heart was in it to the point that I could intuitively sense that, and we did it. I don't have that capacity anymore. I have to rely on our young chaplains closer to those we're trying to reach to tell me, what does it look like? I'm just all into trying to help make it happen.
Quick one, to connect on that again, I did put back to the partnership with Parachurch, and Jason, I take to use your example. I would say at Schofield Barracks, in my estimate, the organization that is most significantly impacting singles has no resource problem at all. It's Navigators on Tuesday night. As I used to leave my office late, and I watched the parking lot get more and more and more, and I would say it's starting to rival some of the chapel services. It's at a time that's and so I've got no chaplains in that. I've got no no facility issues. I think we were like buying some pizzas, maybe. So I personally, I don't find a problem with resources. Like, I know we all say they're constrained, but I usually find a way to get past that.
And to Steve's point, we'd be lying too if we didn't say, how many of us, we were all in terms of whatever it took in terms of our own money.
Oh, yeah.
To make ministry happen. It was just there. I wasn't looking to the C-top because it was anemic and minuscule compared to what we were spending right and left for the kingdom, gladly, joyfully.
I think one of the interesting questions too, though, Jason, and I think this is where the collaboration between a senior chaplains and a bunch of your junior chaplains can really be helpful, is we know all that stuff, and you're used to dealing with all that stuff, not having the resources, blah, 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 blah. What we need is your creative ideas. I mean, you heard me say that my chapel had 12 chaplains. How many chaplains does it work, how many chaplains does it take to run a chapel? We split that group in half, and both groups thrive. So how many, how do we we need you to come up with creative ways to tell us how to use the money, the facilities, and the people. Because we got all that. I got all that. You're with me in the light. I got buildings, I got people, I got some money, some. But that's where the senior guys need to help us. But it's getting the ideas.
That's the only, are you the only NCO I've seen here?
Oh, I just had a question just to piggyback on Chaplain Shane's question. So is the change in demographic from single soldiers initially to families to now what our Father's Church? Is it because of retention? Are these the same single soldiers that are now married with children who are now fathers, or are we? Is it the product that we're giving, or is the demographic change because of retention?
I'll just give a quick crack at that. Number one, I do think we all learned single soldiers are the hardest demographic to reach. That's the hardest game to win, is to reach single soldiers, because they've got lots of reasons to not be interested in what you and I are selling, so to speak, or trying to get away. So it's just tough to reach single soldiers. So by default, when a soldier gets married, they tend to think a little bit more about stuff like, hey, spiritual stuff, going to chapel, and then what happens when you have children. they tend to really start getting dialed in on maybe getting serious about life. So it's just an easier game to win in regard to couples and families than single soldiers. Steve, you said it, we've all admitted, the verdict's still out. What is the best way to reach single soldiers? Navigators are probably the closest thing to it with what they're doing through pizza and gatherings on the night in the barracks. But so anyway, I'm not sure if that's helpful.
I can take a
stab.
Like quick stab at it, and I'll caveat it with, I am probably the harsher critic of the group. And I think there's an element of losing the first passion, and then to ironically take a strange twist on something that Dave said. The passion became a victim of success. Success being defined as numbers. And when young families come, they come with kids, and pretty soon your offering control sheets are gigantic. And so we went from an old World War II chapel where we gutted it, put in round tables. The most we could hold was 60, 70 people, and we were regularly running about that in singles from the barracks. And intentionally had no childcare, like none. So young couples tend to not come to that. Once we got the great, magnificent new facility with all the parking and bells and whistles and bathrooms, which an old World War II chapel didn't have those either, we blew out the doors on couples. And once the singles saw all the couples, they dwindled off. And so I would submit Chapel Next was, the original passion of Chapel Next was a victim of its own success. And again, I say that, I'm probably the harsher critic of the bunch.
Now, somebody asked me that after last session, what was the one thing you'd do if you could tell your younger self? You know, that was what we never thought what success looked like. We were just trying to get it off the ground and passionately trying to reach these younger soldiers. But we never thought, hey, 5 years from now, what does this thing look like? If I had to go back, I would have spent a lot more time thinking about that, because we still have the highest percentage of single soldiers in Chapel Next, I think, even today. But it's just, it was overcome. Now, what are you going to do? Tell people no? Hey, don't bring those kids and families over here, No, you just, so you become a victim. Yeah, we became a victim of our own.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the X in Chapel X is for Gen X. So it was a model that came from exegeting the culture. There's a bunch of people that were saying, hey, my parents going through the motions in high church was just that. I want to experience Jesus. And so that model was based off what the generation was asking. Well, when I was 21, I was a lieutenant in these services as an infantry guy. And it met my needs, and it still does. Problems, I'm 40 now. So a generation has grown up with the model because it was for their generation. But now the next generation just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You walk in and say, like, what's up with the lights and the smoke? And does the worship leader get the tattoo before he becomes a worship leader, or does that come afterwards? They're confused because they have different needs. Well, you've been waiting very patiently.
Yeah, well, and it's been from the very beginning. From when you were talking, you mentioned it's come out repeatedly since, and I think you've already kind of touched on it about the whole singleness factor. And I'm going to admit, I think you realize that you need to do something different when you recognize that you have blind spots and you start hearing stuff that makes you go, well, I never thought of that. Why is that important? So you've repeatedly mentioned, and I'm coming from a different perspective. I'm a National Guard chaplain. We have a whole world of different challenges that active duty doesn't. So you've already touched on it a little bit in my patients, but I would love for you to expound on why that was one of your core factors of reaching. And I think it's because you said it's the hardest group, but I'd love to hear you talk on why that's such an important demographic.
I'd say important demographic without me.
Okay.
A young guy with no interest in anything spiritual. So it was personally driven. That I believe there were a lot of other guys like me that were in barracks. And it's a pragmatic. If you just draw the bell curve of what is the largest amount of the Army, it is a 17 to 25-year-old living in the barracks, typically single. Typically single, living in the barracks. I guess that's the correct order. It's shooting for the majority. Okay? And, yeah, go ahead.
No, I just could say to Master Sergeant Rankin's point, that has been a huge demographic shift in the United States
I was
Army
gonna
over
say
the
the
last
same
30
thing.
years.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it used to be, you know, the bell curve was nearly
Yeah.
exclusively single 18 to 20, but, you know, and then by the time 80s, volunteer Army, 90s kick in, that has been a huge shift, but we do have a lot more married, young married folks that they didn't have 60s, 70s, even into the 80s. And, you know, so that's got to have something to do with it. But to Steve's point, I would say the same. When I looked out across the division, 18,000, most of them were single soldiers, and most of them had nothing to do with chapel on Sunday morning. And so we got to do something about that.
So to translate that to my environment, I need to look at my bell curve to see what my biggest population group is, but then figure out a way to be able to connect people on the other end of the bell curve. Because unfortunately, I don't have the option of having multiple chapel services. So I need to figure out how to target the main, but then connect the others.
The survey approach tells you who you should be targeting. I mean, who's not coming and why are they not coming? You can't figure all that out ahead of time. You can't build the plan and then go find that demographic. You gotta do the hard survey work first.
Okay.
Who's out there and who's not coming? What's keeping them from coming?
And I would say it's okay to fail and say yes in one area, and so you know you're not failing in another. It's okay, because maybe God's not calling you to reach everybody. He's calling you to reach somebody, and now only you can answer that in concert with the Holy Spirit. Is what, you know, Steve's heart was absolutely single soldiers because of the reasons he's given. I would say mine probably not quite to the degree of his, and where I was, I had a heart for a lot of young couples that, again, were staying away from chapel by the hundreds.
But one of the cool parts of the story that I was expecting to hear was the pulpit supply, that Easter series where we swapped pulpits at all 3 locations. I think that's probably never been done since, but that's a cool part of the story. And then the other thing, I think you touched it briefly, but we've got to be able to go armed with the ammunition of, we are not establishing a religion, because that was the biggest challenge. That's how I would answer the first question that I got, was you're establishing something that's not already in there. Well, the gospel, okay, if we are, it's no different than the gospel service has been doing my whole career. So you've got to have that ammunition in your back pocket, because I think you'll need it. So the next, whatever the next new thing is, you're going to hear that same, you're establishing religion, and we can't do that. That's Title 10, you know, landmine stuff. And then now this generation can say, well, the gospel service does it, and Chapel Next has been doing it for 20 years. Like, so stop them from doing it, then you can stop us from doing this new thing.
I'm not sure why Steve kind of brought this up earlier. I'm not sure why we missed this, but to me, this is one of the, it was glaringly obvious to me, and it's glaringly obvious to me now. What percentage of the soldiers in the Army are under 30? It's 71%.
Right around 7, does it stay around 7?
70% of the, well, guess what it was when we were captains? Yeah, 70%. This is an institutional thing in the Army, that the Army is always going to be under 30. And so if we're not changing our approach every 5 to 10 years.
Chaplains are always going to be
Yeah, I mean,
over 30.
we get a year older every year, and the majority of the Army stays the same. It will always stay 70%, plus or minus 1%, under 30, which you can take heart. And I only know this because this is stuff I like to read about. If we were Marines, it would be worse. They're hitting that 70% at age 25. And we get a little bit more room than they do, but that will always, so that's always the majority of the Army, is always that age demographic.
So why we've held so tightly onto doing things the way we've always done perplexes me, because the audience, every 5 to 10 years, I mean, we're now 3 generations behind, right? I mean, so.
Sir, I actually have a question and a possible response. I'm just going to hear what your thoughts are. So, Chapel Next was based on the Willow Creek and Saddleback model, originally, kind of. So seeker sensitive with that's turning out in some of the generations, younger generations, they're not going to that. So an outside critique, so when I showed up, I'm a newly transitioned to the PCA church, high liturgical, I'm ready to go to my liturgical service. Jim Murphy knife hands me, you're gonna be in charge of chapel next. I'm like, okay, I have no, I know nothing, other than it's really successful, and that's where my son wants to go. But as soon as I got there, my question was, where is the depth? Now, I don't say content, I think that the content, the theological content was good. But I, as an outsider looking in from a sort of liturgical, and you know how it used to be, like they'll never meet, you just go off and do your thing, is I think we have a content problem with Chapel Next that we're trying to address at Campbell, because there's a theological and biblical illiteracy that is, you can't say, well, remember the story in Exodus? They're gonna look at you and go, I have no idea what you're talking about. We have people who, we're looking at the Apostles' Creed right now, and they've never heard it. And these are folks, so I just wonder, what is your response? Is it because the vehicle of delivery is still effective, but the content just never, changed, or what do you think?
I have to look at it through a different lens too, and I would say you can make that same argument no matter what your methodology is.
Yeah,
so
okay.
at this age and stage, it's a healthy, looks like healthy, looks like healthy, looks like healthy. Whether it's liturgical, seeker sensitive, seeker insensitive, whatever, I don't know, what are the options, what I love about what you're saying is you're searching for what's right, what's a healthy community of believers look like. Hold to that. And that's the substance. What that substance gets wrapped in, I would say hold that loosely. Because that can be very, very light. So I've been a part of Chapel Next that outstripped anything, so to speak, that I've seen anywhere else in terms of depth on multiple factors. And I've seen Chapel Next that I've just dropped my head and like, where did the vision, the values get lost, and this isn't what, and they're still out there. There's still marvelous work going on, and there's still some that are Chapel Next, quote unquote, in name only, because there's not much there that resembles what I would know to be that. And the same would be true, I believe, of maybe high church liturgical brothers and sisters. There are marvelous works going on that are reaching people and changing lives, and there are ones that are just boring as all get out, that are reaching nobody, just as the contemporary works are, and everything in between. So what's good is, us spending our time, what's right, what's healthy, what's vibrant. Success is not numbers, it can't be. Success has to be about healthiness, the body of the believers.
So it's really a leadership challenge. It's always been a leadership challenge.
Yes.
Let me put a plug though for another group that we're trying to do something with in Hawaii, and that is your directors of religious education. Okay, we've talked a lot about our partnership with outside organizations like the Navigators. I think that's a great way to go. But also you have DREs on your staff, and so when we start talking about depth, when we start talking about education, and how do you? So we always envision Chapel Next, at least in the original. In fact, when we briefed the chief, one of the slides we put up was a funnel. We had this big opening, and we were just trying to get them in, butts and seats, right? But then they were supposed to come down this funnel, and then this was the part where you asked me about unchurched, because there were off ramps in this funnel, and we had a philosophy. I'm not sure it was a good one. In the early days, that we would engage soldiers who had come in, because if they were totally unchurched, then obviously we want to lead them to the Lord and plug them in. But a lot of the folks who came back to Chapel Next had come from other church backgrounds. And so we would ask them, and then we would funnel them to their church of origin. And then for that depth, they might still come to Sunday morning at Chapel Next, but they might also go to some other service that could give them more of that depth. But I think that as we look at new models, the DREs, the navigators, those kind of folks are I think, a resource that we can help us get that depth.
You weren't moving toward a small group, you weren't moving towards serving, you weren't moving toward giving. That wasn't part of the Chapel Next model, because we were ruthless about letting folks know Sunday is just the wide open end of the funnel to reach the lost. Once you become found, now let's go to work on discipleship and a very definitive path toward that. A lot of that seems to have been lost.
Hey, a quick one, just 'cause it actually comes back to your question, Steve. One of the ways I easily culled the herd of those who were interested in all the chaplains who, once this thing was underway, it was doing well, all of a sudden, now we got all kinds of chaplains who want to be on this team. One of my simple calling one was, every chaplain is expected to lead a small group, personally, in either their home, or you can do it in the chapel. Your unit group doesn't count. I mean, it's like basic spiritual formation and religious education, right? Man, that cut the herd massively. The number of chaplains who were like, what? Yeah, I'm called to preach. Good, you'll get an opportunity to preach, but you need to lead a small group. So it struck me as the amount of chaplains who want to carry out a function, but are not interested in the spiritual formation, the religious education, the building disciples of Christ. They think their magic message is going to do it. I'll be on.
We're going to need to transition, but if I can ask you in 30 seconds or less, what advice would you give to major students?
I'll be mine tomorrow, so I will devote my 30 seconds today. He's got 60.
I'd say, pray. Look for God to give you that vision. And then grab onto that. See if there are other like-minded folks who want to get in on that with you. And then just get after it. Like Steve, what did you call it earlier? Something tenacious.
Intense tenacity.
Intense tenacity. Then just work it, and then find some seniors who are willing to maybe fly some top cover for you, resource you, be a good sounding board for you, and get after it.
One or two things, Josh, I'd say with all the meekness, humility, softness, compassion, and gentleness I could, either help out or get out of the way. Either help out, be a catalyst for good, or if you can't do that, you just can't bring yourself to do that because it's not your flavor, it's not what you want, you don't understand. If you can't help out, then just get out of
Probably a good place to end. So let's give a hand.